Ladies and gentlemen, Ed Cappabianca has some good news to share.
Oh,
Hey everybody. I've been coming to this thing for a while. I've known Joe for even longer. I just wanted to share with everyone our company's experience of the sort of dual regulatory pathway of a small medical device company trying to bring our product into the market. It's been a long time coming, and really what the intention of today is to sort of hopefully give a lot of other people benefits from our rather painful experience over the past several years, I would say. With that, I'll start sharing some slides. Let's see if I can, here it is. So everybody can see that now.
Yes, sir.
And I've presented here before about our company, but as there are a lot of folks here today who may not know us, the structure is going to be a little bit about who we are, what we're doing, the decisions that we made at the beginning of how we were going to go about getting our device into the market, the sort of chronology of that, and then lessons learned. And as I say, through this network is how I met Ronald Bowmans, I met Michelle, and hence Trey. And so although I'm the main presenter, I will at various times through this be very happy for them to chime in with their experiences of trying to advise me and my team through one of the ways I describe what we've been doing is sort of, as many have said, trying to repair the plane in midair a lot of the times, which is not necessarily the way you want to go. But sometimes it's where you are. So with that, our company, Ingenian Medical, also on the call today is one of my colleagues, Tim Maloney, who's our commercial director, and he's relieved that we're at this stage that we're at now because he can finally start doing other stuff that's relevant to his actual job.
Yeah.
And he may have some things to add. So this company was founded in 2013, actually inheriting a lot of technology from a predecessor company. But we're based in the UK, and what we're focused on is urinary control and trying to find a better way to do that. What you see there is not our product. Our product is this device. But that is the way that an awful lot of people today have to deal with their lack of urinary control, which is a Foley catheter, which is a tube into the urethra, anchored in the bladder, and then free drainage into a bag that's strapped to your leg. There's more than 200 million people who are affected by this. It causes a massive amount of catheter-associated urinary tract infections, which cost healthcare systems a lot of money and cause a lot of people to die unnecessarily. We basically say the existing systems of Foley's and intermittent catheters are inconvenient, dehumanizing, costly, and deadly. It's painful and humiliating. Yep.
Before you continue, and of course you're just introducing the product, but you did just enough so people who've not met you before have an idea about the area. I'd like to ask Brent Lang to come off mute. He is a gastroenterologist and friend and client, and he's coming to 10X again this year. And he is in remote patient monitoring for urinary devices. He's delivered, 7 or 10,000 babies. He knows a thing or two about that area of the body. And early on, when you were telling me about this new company you joined, Ingenian, I said, oh, you got to talk to Brent. And you guys spoke, and he's like my go-to for this part of the body. And I know, Brent, you had some reservations and some thoughts and some questions before Eddie tells you about his recent successes. Do you remember where you were the last time you heard about this, or what you were thinking, or your concerns were? And I'm wondering if Ed summarily has addressed all of those things.
Sure. Just to clarify, I'm a urogynecologist, not a gastroenterologist.
I'm sorry, that's what I meant. I knew it had a lot of syllables. I
Well,
was
we've
going to
had
impress people
conversations
just like Stone, but I messed it up.
Yeah, it's not concerns. I don't want to express it as concerns. I know that Ed and his team have worked a long time on this. I remember seeing this device probably 20 years ago in a different version at a meeting in Libertyville, and it's come a long way since then. I guess the question, it's more a matter of having done this several times with startups, having been through the process and now having two companies in the medtech arena, is when you say that your pitch is that you're reducing CODIs, right? You know, we all know that CODIs
Yeah.
are a problem, and they are prevalent in the hospital-based population. You say that this technology of intermittent emptying that you're proposing that have developed is going to lower that rate. Have you shown that? Do you actually have a clinical study that shows that you in fact reduced the amount of catheter-associated infections?
So we, Brent, we have a clinical study. It's not linked to our regulatory approval, but we have a clinical study about to start here in the UK, which is going to compare 30 men using our device for 3 months. So they'll get a new device a month for 3 months against the current standard of care of a Foley catheter. Again, those men will be monitored for 3 months. Now, the patient group that we're specifically focused on here are men who are awaiting a transurethral resection of the prostate, or TURP. And the reason we've chosen that group is twofold. One, they're otherwise generally healthy. They have an enlarged prostate, which is, again, not cancerous, or at least not, diagnosed to be cancer when they enroll in the study. It may become, deemed cancerous later. But those patients here in the UK are a big part of the NHS waiting list. So these are men who have this need for this procedure, but they end up getting shoved onto a Foley catheter, sometimes for as long as 12, 18, 24 months. And so it's a very, very, inconvenient and dehumanizing element for them. And so out of that group, we recognize that there are going to be different patient groups, and we're going to need to do this several times. But through that, we'll be able to, be generating revenue as we generate data on these other patient groups. What we have done, however, what we can talk about, is that last fall we did an encrustation study. Now, yes, this is a lab-based study, but it is some really quite compelling data against not only Foley's, but also flip flow valves. And we can, from that, we think, reasonably interpolate that we will have fewer infections, more importantly as well, fewer blockages than any of the current standards of care.
Do you plan to include self-cath in there as well, intermittent self-cath in your study? Or just the indwelling catheters?
So our catheter itself, the current instructions for use require that either a urologist or a properly trained nurse, any clinician, will be doing the insertion and the withdrawals. Over time, we will want to validate that it could be self-inserted, but that would be a change to the initial CE mark that we're getting.
Another, not a concern, just
Can
a
I
question.
add something?
Go ahead.
Add something
Sure.
to that about the study. You have basically two types of evidence. One is non-inferiority, and the other is superiority. And often the evidence of proving non-inferiority is easier, and therefore, if you want to get to the market, that's your way to go. And then later you can add the superiority and maybe even change the state of the art in acceptability of risks. And that's where you can get this very powerful position when you're a startup. And that's basically the strategy we're at now. So yes, we're looking at the superiority of the device now.
Good point. I guess my point is just the fact when you are presenting 90% reduction in infection, that's significant, obviously. And it's just a matter of defining what population, If you're looking if you're comparing it to in-hospital based patients with multiple comorbidities, that's one group. But if you're going to compare it to ambulatory, otherwise healthy individuals with blockage, that's obviously another group. And I think that's going to be critical probably to, eventually getting reimbursement, things like that, is you can show that, you in fact have an impact on the infection rate. I had a quick question. I don't want to dominate the conversation. Is in terms of your regulatory approval process, we had a conversation before whether you would go through on a 510K or you would go 510K class 2 exempt, or you would in fact have to do a PMA because there was no predicate device. Where did you finally arrive at?
Brent, because I
Yeah.
haven't shared my slides with you, you don't know that that's what I'm coming to. But,
Okay, well,
but it is.
But I would
tell you
like
what.
to,
Come
I would
along.
like to say, I think that this question, and Trey can correct me if I'm wrong, but is like foreshadowing of how the conversation with the FDA went.
Yep.
Yes, agreed.
Exactly.
okay.
So just this is the last slide. So our device, that's how it looks when it's inserted into the body. And basically it is a valve that is opened by this external magnet that the patient keeps with them at all times. This little tag here is not part of our device, but it's basically a tracker that because a lot of people said, well, what if the patient loses their magnet? And so this is a quick fix, but it can be done with any type of these similar tags that a lot of people have nowadays. But what's really important about our device is that there's no external tubes or bags. So it's completely controlled by the patient. They have a complete voiding because where the drainage hole of our device is at the base of the malacot, right at the base of the bladder neck. Whereas in a Foley catheter, when there's a balloon in there, the emptying is from the top of the balloon, which always leaves a reservoir of, stale urine, if you will, at 37 degrees inside the bladder. But also importantly is that channel of air that goes into the bladder at all times when you have the bag attached is again creates a breathing environment that our device doesn't have. And again, that lab-based study that I mentioned actually we think pretty well demonstrates that. So
You have a wick, don't you? You have a wick on the device to remove it with. Is that a braided wick or a monofilament?
So it's two monofilament it's basically suture material, and that is there to withdraw the device from the patient at the end of the month. Okay. So the big questions are, why did we choose to go the direction that we did? And fundamentally, it's partly because we're a UK/European company. Well, we were European before Brexit. And this company, before I joined, already had a CE mark on the first generation of the device. So I thought, how hard could that be to get a CE mark on something that's already had a CE mark? Our prior advice had been as well that the FDA would require a full PMA, which obviously has a lot of, generating a bunch of data, which has time and cost associated with it. So CE marking for Class 2B device does not require patient data, even under the new MDR environment. But what we have committed to is post-market surveillance reporting on our device. And that's important as well, because that's going to help us generate more information about how this device behaves with patients. That can help us figure out which patient groups might be more benefited by our device. So, and when I joined the company, we had a number of UK-based advisors, and a lot of their experience was in the CE marking. So that's kind of why and how we got to where we were. So there we go. Here's a very busy timeline because it's been a busy few years. Like I say, the first generation device was CE marked under the old MDD, but we were not able to extend that CE mark. And that's because if you look, the CE mark process was for us, the first gen was CE marked in 2014, but then MDR was adopted in 2017, and it was going to be phased in. In 2019, that initial CE marking expired, but I did not join the company until November of that year, which was mighty unfortunate, I realized in hindsight. Then, of course, shortly after I joined, we had COVID, which I'm sure everybody remembers, and that really significantly delayed things as well. Through all of that, because of the adoption of MDR, others have talked in previous conversations, but just as a reminder, the number of notified bodies across Europe dropped significantly because all of the notified bodies themselves had to get approved for issuing CE marks under the new MDR system. So that caused us a delay. And we had to choose who would be able to work with us. And that was also important because not all notified bodies can do all devices. In the US, the FDA does all devices, and they then figure out who the team is inside to look at that device, but you basically have a one-stop shop. In Europe, for those who don't know, you have to pick your notified body, and you can go to any country you want, but that notified body may only have certification to approve certain types of devices. And then on top of that, you have to find out what sort of pipeline of existing customers they have, that they're going to be reissuing CE marks on existing products for existing customers, and that's going to fill an awful lot of their capacity. So we ended up choosing a group in Italy, and we chose them actually in 2021, long before they themselves even could issue CE marks under the new system. If we had a device that had been grandfathered, we could have done that way, but that was not an option that was open to us. They didn't get their ability to issue CE marks until October of the next year. And by the middle of December, we made our first submission. And then the real difficult work of the work happened. We had 3 submissions during the year of 2023. It's at this point that I'll mention that it wasn't until the September submission, a few weeks before the September submission, is when Ronald, I met him here on the MDG calls because he made a presentation. I immediately reached out to him and said, I think you need to help us. And he kindly said, yes, you do need help. He then actually agreed to help us. So we submitted in September, we submitted in December, we submitted again in January. And so after the 5th submission, and I won't go into a lot of the details as to what happened on all of those, but by the 5th submission, we finally got our tech file passed. And that really was sort of the major hurdle to get over, because in the month of February, just last month, we had our first and only site visit, and we passed that with 12 minor nonconformities. So we are now into basically just the paperwork exercises of getting the CE mark. We think maybe by the end of March, but we've got Easter holidays coming up, and so it might be the first week of April. So it's around that time. As a comparison, the FDA process, a really important thing happened before we decided to go down the 510K process, and that is that a US company called Vesiflow went to the FDA and got their device for female urinary retention approved. I think they went through a PMA, but now they have FDA approval. They even have reimbursement.
It was a de novo.
Yeah.
So was it a de novo?
Yeah.
Thanks, Michelle.
Mm-hmm.
So we thought they might be a predicate device, and so we started exploring that, and we started exploring that with Michelle and Trey. We decided to not choose them as a lead predicate device, but as a reference device. And we were taking, because the top half of this slide was taking so much time, we weren't as efficient, I would say, in the preparation of things with Trey and Michelle as we might have otherwise been. So that took longer than probably it would have needed to normally. And the system in the US, to my mind, feels a lot more efficient, because again, you're dealing directly with the organization that's going to basically say yes or no, as opposed to having to find the one out of many different organizations. And we submitted the pre-sub, and was it just last week or week before, Trey?
29th.
29th. So yep, it was just last week that we had our meeting with the FDA, and I felt that it was I would say constructive and clear guidance. And it's there's a lot still to be done, I think, but it's pretty clear to me how we're going to move forward. And I don't think it's going to take nearly the same amount of time as the CE marking process has taken. Okay. So here are a few things that I would recommend to people to keep in mind, and this is where I would be very appreciative and happy for Ronald to chime in, particularly on the CE mark side, but also Trey and Michelle on the FDA side. So first thing I got to tell everybody is make sure you're working with high quality advisors and have very supportive investors. The advisors we started off working with, they were nice, but I got to say, it felt to me at different times like they had more of a history on the MDD approach to CE marking and didn't necessarily think, MDR first. And Ronald came in and had, very incisive advice to give us on a number of different fronts. But one area that really caught us up in those last two submissions that we were making was that there are two standards of risk management. In the US, under the FDA, the ISO standard 14971 is the guiding principle to the FDA. Whereas in the MDR system, they have their own approach where they kind of will accept that 14971 can be followed. But the subtle difference is, and Ronald helped me out with this one, it's about the fact that whether you rate your risks high or low, under MDR, you have to assess every single risk. Whereas 14971 basically allows you to categorize your risks and then deal with the high risks and the medium risks. And maybe you can deal with the low risks, or you can ignore them because they're low risks. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, sort of, yes. That's General Safety Performance Requirement 3. It requires that you reduce all risk. You must address and reduce all risk, and no exceptions there. What you can do is say, well, some risks are acceptable. Some risks may require additional post-market surveillance activities. And some risks are, not acceptable. Sometimes you can have a device with an unacceptable risk and still accept that risk. It is possible to do that. It did accept the device because there is no alternative. The alternative is that you die, or whatever. So there's a good reason to do that. One of my clients, they make and they have a technology. If you apply that to a human body, it has a side effect, namely the patient dies. So they have something to compensate for that. And if you use that without using the other technology, the patient will die. So the patient must be kept in a very tight balance. This is very high risk, but if you don't use that, the patient will die. So they're acceptable, I think. And that's you need to be. You cannot hide behind procedures and checkboxes when dealing with risk. You really need to understand the risk you're dealing with. So that's what you need to do there. That's what the requirement is about.
Yeah. Thank you, Ronald. The other points here, and I'll try to run through them so that then we can get to some good Q&A here. Take time to confirm your device classification number. Across the 5 submissions that we made, we had a number of sort of epiphanies that came to us. One of which was that for a period of time, the notified body, we think, believed that ours was an active medical device, and it is not an active medical device. That may have caused who we got assigned to us. And one of the other challenges in this is that once a reviewer is assigned by at least this notified body, it cannot be reassigned. So you have to satisfy their mindset. And like I say, if they're coming from a standpoint that it's an active device, it's quite a challenge to sort of bring things into an area where you agree. The other important thing about this, by the way, is that going back to what I was referring to before, not all notified bodies can deal with all medical devices, whereas the FDA, they can deal with anything. They'll always find the people. And so if the person who is qualified to assess your medical device leaves your notified body, you're in a very bad place, because they can no longer be classifying your device. And so these are, again, important issues. I know of another company.
If the human who worked on your project leaves the organization, your approval is invalidated?
They will basically, this brings me on to another thing about how you choose your notified body. and again, Ronald can probably speak to this with, more insight and authority, but that is my understanding. There's a company I know who's using the same notified body, and the reviewer who worked on their product moved to another firm, and then they couldn't continue or renew that company's certification. And this moves me into that next thing, which is that, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, so that just seems weird. I would think if you were in the midst of review, a new reviewer might be assigned and you would have to start over, but I can't imagine that once it's done, it's done. So Ronald, could you really explain
Yeah,
about that?
Ronald,
I'm just
can
kind
you
of curious.
maybe
Yeah,
I
well, for every field of expertise there a notified body is designated for, they need to have at least one specialist.
Mhm.
And so the problem is that if they lose their specialist, they cannot issue certificates. And of course, it's very painful. If you go to slightly larger or higher specialized notified bodies, then
Mhm.
the risk of losing that single specialist is smaller. So you really have to be careful in understanding who your notified body is. What I typically do is I scope the notified body and then try to profile the company in such a way that I have some understanding of the profiles of other companies working with that notified body, and then I recommend 2 or 3 notified bodies to the company, and that usually works. But it is very difficult to get the right notified body. It always feels like you didn't get the right notified body.
So if you got your certificate though, and then the guy died because he was a really old expert, you're just saying they couldn't renew, or to renew the certificate, everything, of course, is going to be looked at again to renew, but I'm like, they're not going to yank the certificate because the reviewer died, because at FDA you got your 510K and they don't yank your 510K because the reviewer died. I mean, I get the expertise part, but to me that if you don't ever change your device and your reviewer was your reviewer, that just seems crazy.
I haven't heard about that, but if you're halfway a reviewing process,
Halfway,
that's a different thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
so don't make your file too difficult, because otherwise you may mentally overload your reviewer too much. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And I think that and Ginger, no, it's a good point, because I think my sense is that yes, once you have your certificate, if they died before you had to have it renewed, you'd have to figure that out, but you'd have a window of time to do that. But what also my next point, which is really unbelievably important, and we kind of fell into this trap, is that you have to choose your notified body carefully, because one of the key changes of moving from MDD to MDR that the EU was trying to solve was shopping for an easier going notified body, right? And one of the ways that they did that is that they said, basically, once you've chosen your notified body, switching is unbelievably difficult, because you have to basically kind of fire your notified body, but they then have to write a report. And then that report goes up to the Ministry of Health, where that notified, in the country that notified body is, before you can then go and change your notified body. So it's a very time consuming and costly thing. And there's reputation risk as well, because they may write a report that isn't necessarily, oh, we just couldn't get to agreement on something and it's completely reasonable. It can raise question marks over you as a company as to, well, maybe your device really has some problems to it. And that's why they were trying to move from the notified body. So that is a really important thing to keep in mind, because at a point we were rather frustrated with going back again and again and again. And we thought, well, could we change? And like I say, because we'd already committed, we had to continue through until we got to the end. So I mentioned before the classification number, something simple like whether it is a medical device that is non-active versus active. You want to make sure that you have all that clear at the front end before you finally make your decision, that you know in your own mind how you're justifying and classifying your device, to make sure you're getting assigned to the right person within your notified body. And then you want to figure out how long it's going to take you to get your tech file compiled. As I say, we started off with something where unfortunately, the first advisors we were working with, I feel were sort of cribbing too much from the old MDD file that we had. And in fact, we really shouldn't have been doing that. And I didn't realize that at the time until we had, our COO came in halfway through this process, and Ronald came in after that, that I learned an awful lot, shall we say, through the whole process. And the last thing I'll say about choosing your notified body is make sure you read their contract very carefully. We've been caught out on a couple of things which we've had to negotiate with them, including things like the way they charge for their travel expenses of their reviewers to come and visit our company. And I'll just leave that one at that. But with respect to notified bodies, there is an organization, we only learned this late in the game, called Team NB, which is a trade association for notified bodies. And in their mission statement, they say that those notified bodies are there to help make new technologies quickly available to patients through efficient and robust approval processes. And sometimes they need reminding that they've all signed up to that code of conduct. But that is what it is. But I think that, again, don't be afraid to escalate concerns that you have early within the notified bodies, because that did seem to be helpful to our process. And the big issue is, how much does all this cost you? And hopefully with some of this advice that I'm giving people, it won't cost you as much as it has to us so far on the CE marking front. We went into this thinking it would cost maybe about $100,000, and we're triple that right now.
Wow.
Yeah.
David?
So Eddie, thanks for your overview so far, but I wondered about don't be afraid to escalate.
Yeah.
I presume you did, or you're just suggesting, but is that to the management of the notified body or to the competent authority?
So we only went to the management of the notified body. And one of the things that we asked for at one point through this whole process was an internal peer review at the notified body. But unfortunately, what we were told, and again, this may be because this notified body, they're quite small, but they've been building. And at the time that we asked for a peer review, I don't believe that they had another reviewer who had the same skill set as the reviewer that we had. And so they said, oh, well, we don't have someone who can review this. Some months later,
he was even a consultant in like not only another country, but another continent.
For the notified body, Michelle?
Yeah.
And so, like I say, by the end, there was a really important meeting that we had between the 4th and the 5th submissions, where we basically had escalated this to the very highest levels within that organization. And, we ended up getting, I think, to, a better understanding. And I think they had a good understanding of what our, situation was, because fundamentally our device, we know is safe. We know it won't kill anyone. And, the whole, impetus of the notified bodies is to make sure things are safe, but, not a lot more than that. It, that's the safety is the paramount thing. And it shouldn't be the regulatory tail wagging, the therapeutic dog.
Yeah. Thanks. So Ronald, perhaps you could comment on selection of the notified body, a new small one from an Italy or who knows where these days versus the big boys and girls in the business.
Yeah, it comes to you really have to understand the whole process, and then there are a lot of factors at play. So let me give you some examples. If you're a small company, right, run a single device, and you go to one of the big boys, to DECRA, BSI, they're full scope notified bodies, and they have all these very big clients. Now, if one of those clients has a problem, guess who's moving? Right. And they really drop companies off the table. It happened. Suddenly So company has been waiting, and oh yes, now they're going to review our tax file, and sorry, it's been delayed by 9 months. It happens, and that may cause huge problems for those companies. So that's a risk. Now, having said that, I have managed to push a company with a very urgent problem into to a suit on a very short notice. They had a company dropping out, so they had some space there. They could move that company in. So it is not always that straightforward, right?
Right.
If you go to a smaller notified body, then you're probably one of their equal, more at the same level of the other clients. So you're just as important as most of the other clients. That's a good position. But then, because it's a smaller notified body, there are also higher risks in continuity of the notified body. And yeah, and if something goes wrong, if you have a problem with a reviewer, then it may be very difficult to switch. The larger notified bodies do that. So it is incredibly difficult, and it all depends on your device. So if you have a very straightforward active device, I know a notified body, but they're very good at active devices. Go there, they have all the expertise in-house, they know what they're doing. If they tell you it's going to take 6 months, it is going to take 6 months. But if your device also has something with sterility, for example, don't go there. They can't do that. It's they say they can do it, but no, it's a very bad experience with that. So then you need to switch somewhere else. So it is an art form to select the right notified body, and even then, yeah. What I sometimes do is just for test, I send out an email to all notified bodies using the email address that is in Nendo. Now, you're lucky if you get 10% response. Then I go to their website and I do the same thing. That doubles the yield to 20%, and not the same notified bodies, by the way. So how do you reach them? Well, you need to know people. I hate that, but you need to know people. So if I reach out to a notified body and I don't get a response, then I go into my network, find a guy or person working for that notified body, and say, I just reached out with this question and I didn't get a reply. Can you look if someone is can you please find out if someone is looking into it? And then within days I get an answer. It's not how it should work. It should be an open process. What I've now recently proposed, but I only heard a lot of people laugh in Brussels, is how about the European Commission just pick up, let's say, 50 or 100 small companies and say, okay, this is reasonable for your notified body certification. Let's say 100,000 euros, right? Okay, you pay that. Everything extra we pay, and we're going to help you getting to the notified bodies only using your email addresses you're communicating. It will be a very sobering experience for those people in Brussels. But I have the feeling this will not work. They're not going to do that. Because hang on, this is reality. And so yeah, we have this notified body problem, and it's there to stay. So we need to learn to live with it.
Thank you.
Mark was asking, how many notified bodies are there now?
Yeah, I can look that up. One came out yesterday, day before yesterday. Where are we? Well, for the MDR, we have at this moment 44. IVDR 12. There are some assigned for both.
But again, I'd highlight that is all those 44 don't do every single type of product. Yep. One thing I'll also mention, by the way, is again, one of the nice things that we learned through the whole process was if our next 2 products are able to have the same classification number, then they should be product extensions of our current CE mark, which means that, again, I'm just trying to get my head around and amortize this cost that we've incurred so far. It shouldn't be nearly as expensive to do the next ones along. And also all of the experience we've had means that we're smarter next time. Mark, I saw a couple of your questions. Number one, you're right. The little ball is actually it's a Sumerian cobalt compound, and it gets lapped and polished and so on and so forth. So it doesn't oxidize. And again, it's only in the body for a month at a time, and then you get a new one in. So we've not seen any problems with it, having any oxidation in that period of time that it's in the body.
Yeah, thanks. Can I ask you another quick question since
Sure.
you answered me? This is a class 3, I assume, since it's implantable?
No, it's a really good question. It is an indwelling catheter up to 30 days. It is not an implantable device. So it's a class 2B. And in fact, when we had our site audit just recently, one of the auditors said, it felt like trying to catch us out that it was an implantable, at which point a lot of things would have changed and we would be, in a bad place. But this is one of the things we've specifically, classified it as in a sense, it's like a contact lenses where they're daily wear, but you use them for more than 30 days. That puts you from class 2A to class 2B effectively. And we're just up to 30 days and then the next one and then the next one.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep.
I've had some excitable discussions with the notified bodies who didn't read their own rules. We'd have to challenge them quite vigorously on the rules, and sometimes it goes our way, sometimes it doesn't. And they just say, you know what, it's this because we said so, and you just have to deal with it. So the more prepared you are. Go ahead.
To your point, Mark, I think that's the most complicated thing about regulatory these days is that you have to know the rules better than the regulators know the rules. And you have to be able to turn the argument on them. And then at the end of the day, they still might say either, like you said, oh, well, I don't care what that says, or they might say, well, that's not what we meant when we said that.
Yeah, Ed, I want to tell you, I appreciate that one slide that you've got for all the little helpful hints, and you could probably add one more line along this discussion right here, but I screenshotted it because I think that is an excellent thing to have and show people, because you've gone through the mess that I'm sure a lot of us here have already gone through. And I assume you could see me smiling and laughing and nodding my head because I feel your pain. I've been through this with people before. So, good on you for going through it. You're stronger for it. You understand a little bit more, and welcome to the club.
I do want to speak just a little bit, because we talked a lot about the EU experience, but I want to speak a little bit to his 510K or pre-submission. Because, and I actually had just gotten off a call before this. I'm doing due diligence for a client that's looking to acquire a technology that had a pre-sub. They had the same experience that Ed did, and that's that the FDA is bringing a room full of clinicians and not regulators to pre-submission meetings. And the clinicians are sitting around and formulating hypotheses together, and the regulators are not like intervening. So one of the clinicians even tried to explain to Trey what substantial equivalence was.
Yeah.
And Trey does a dozen pre-submissions a year or more.
Yeah.
Are you having the same experience, Ginger?
I am, and even the last 510K alone. Well, no, even I did 3 pre-submission, 3 or 4 in the past year. And one was a breakthrough device, and they kept saying, no. This is a X type of device. And we're like, no, it's not. We did a presentation. We've clearly explained everything. You keep bringing new people in and out, and the clinicians keep deciding it's something that it's not. And so on our action item list, we're like, I'm sorry, I know you're bringing in industry consultants in. This is a hot area, but no. Would you like us to send the presentation? Can you look back through your meeting minutes on what we agreed to already? And so, you're going to get a lot of, we're changing your mind on what the expectations are. I get that, but that's the disadvantage of a breakthrough. The breakthrough is, the advantage is it's easy to raise investor funds. because everybody's excited about it. The bad side is the FDA gets to help you design these things,
Yeah.
or they try to. And it is that what if this happened? It would never happen. That's a reasonably, it's not foreseeable risk. We've looked at everything. That's so unlikely, it's very interesting.
Well, I will say as well on the recent experience with the FDA that we had, I mentioned this device from Vesiflow called the Inflow device, which is a device specific for the female anatomy for chronic urinary retention. So our device is for chronic urinary retention in men. But the clinical view of our device was, how could you possibly have sex with your device in place, whereas women have a separate urethra from a vagina, so it's not interfering with sexual intimacy.
Really?
And yeah, so
that was a tricky discussion with the FDA too, wasn't it? We had to do a lot of fancy footwork on that.
Well, I wasn't prepared going into that meeting, and that's the other thing about the strictures of the PMA meeting, is you can't talk about things you hadn't been asked, if you see what I mean. So we were not allowed to go off topic, and I didn't understand that was going to be a topic. And we tried to explain, but we didn't really have the opportunity because they were so entrenched in their thinking beforehand.
They were all female urologists. I mean, not female as a person, but
yeah, no, an awful lot of them had, I think, been involved deeply in the approval of that other product.
Yeah.
And so they, I think, came from that sort of standpoint that this is a unique product. There can't be anything like it. And we actually tried to help them along by explaining that there are an awful lot of, the UK NHS, the Australian NHS actually have protocols that they have published on their websites that, if you can believe this, it's possible to have sexual relations when you have a Foley catheter indwelling in you. You simply have to fold it back, put a condom on, and go for it, guys.
Nice. I'm still laughing.
It's like
Sorry.
I'm still laughing that they were FDA explaining to Trey what substantial equivalence means.
Oh, it gets better. It gets better. It was about maybe 10 minutes into our meeting. I felt they pretty much shut us down because the main physician reviewer said, "Oh, by the way, we've looked at this inflow device," because we actually talked to them about switching it to a predicate, to being instead of the reference device, and they said, either way, that's not going to work out because we have reviewed this in other submissions and we have internal data it's just not going to work out for you.
Basically, we know things that you don't know, so no.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
We passed the top of the hour. Eddie, let me get to some of Divya's questions.
Sure.
How did you identify your notified body? Did you select on the predicate device notified body or check the scope of their certification?
So we chose our notified body because one of the advisors that I mentioned that we were working with and the company was working with before I joined, they themselves, the CEO of that company, that other company, so he was advising our business, a little confusing, sorry. He was advising our business, but he was CEO of his own medical device company. The notified body was the notified body for his medical device company. And so in that way, he felt it was a path of least resistance because of his familiarity with them. We did canvass a number of the big guys, and they all told us, oh, no, we can't get to you for 18 months because, as Ronald said, they were dealing with their big clients who had lots of products that all had to get, through. And last but not least, we were assured that they were going to be getting their own ability to CE mark quite quickly. And so they had their own delays, and we then feel like we suffered from their delays by them sort of doing a pass-through charge for the amount of money they couldn't get from other clients while they weren't able to CE mark things.
The follow-up was, did you discuss the medical device classification with them before you selected them?
Well, there again, we did, but the reviewer who did that classification discussion left, so we had a little bit of that experience. And the next person they brought on, I think didn't really review what this other guy had done and came to his own decisions about things. So, and again, we didn't fully appreciate and understand that until we were well into our process, at which point we had the difficulties of, considering the difficult considerations about possibly changing.
If you go to notified body and apply, so your application, that's quite a thing, right? It's not just, okay, can you send me a quote? It's much more. You really need to apply. And but that's really important, because then they will look at the classification of your device. Is it a medical device? And if so, what risk class? And so if they do that, and if they do it properly, they cannot come back on that. And for some reason, this did not go well. And I spoke with one of the people of that notified body, and I said something about it. Hey, you can't do that. And so that stopped that discussion, sort of like a sideways thing, but it's, yeah, it sometimes happens. But yeah, we also changed something in the device. So initially, the whole product it's a set of devices, right? So you have the catheter, you have an inserter, you have a magnet. It was presented as one product, and I said, well, come on, let's split it up, because the catheter, that's 3B. And the other parts are actually in class 1. So if you consider them as separate devices, they're class 1. One is class 1 sterile, which still needs to notify your body, but it's a different thing. And then you make your life a lot easier, because then suddenly the whole scope of what the notified body is doing is only focusing on that catheter and not on the rest, because class 1, they can't touch that. It's not within their scope of work. It's a self-certified device, not notified body certified device. So the magnet is now already CE marked, basically, because it's a class 1 device.
And that exact sort of strategic thinking is what I'd only wished I'd had at the beginning of our process.
Eddie, I'd say you prevailed pretty nicely.
I've talked to Ed since the beginning of the CE mark process, but after they had already chosen ECM, and I have to say his hope sprang eternal. It was like, they're going to get their designation any day now. Oh, we pay this fee. They're going to move us faster. And
well, and the thing is, again, Tim, who's on here with me, and he's been fielding some of the calls in the chat. Thank you very much, Tim. We were so confident we were going to get this thing. Tim joined us in, what was it, September of 2020?
September 2022. When I interviewed in the summer in July, the feeling was that CE mark would be in place in December 2022.
So I appreciate his great faith and support, and darn it, we're going to get there. So
I think I would just say all sorts of, be sure, yeah, Michelle, that's great, and know how to push back, because you get so many crazy things from notified body. People like, they aren't allowed to do that. Well, they do. You need to have this right now. I'm like, no, not for 2 years, like the safety report. Haven't even gotten the CE mark, and the they're like, next time we come in 6 months, we're going to look at your PSAR. I'm like, no, you're not, because it's only 6 months out. We might have a plan and be collecting data, but we're certainly not going to. No, you have to. But they would bring junior auditors in, right, and let them have at it. And if the client capitulates, you're done. So people looking at QMS and other things like that, just be sure you escalate it.
Eddie, I'll just conclude our call with congratulations. You have been there and you prevailed, and well done, Tim. You'll soon be able to do the commercialization part of your commercialization job. So congratulations to you both, and we'll see you next week. Tim, you're welcome to come even on not Ingenian days. Have a good week, everyone. See you next time.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Joe.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.